Welcome to another episode of Unresolved Textual Tension. Today, we're here with myself, Katie. This is a pipe because it's Sherlock Holmes today, which we'll get to in a second, and my co-hosts, William and Maria.
I'm going to keep that as the intro. Hey guys, today we're doing something a little different. Usually we do speculative fiction of a somewhat, at least vaguely contemporary nature on this podcast. But Maria, while she was homeless for a little bit, read a bunch of Sherlock Holmes stories, and she said this one was kind of gloomy and dark and disturbing and kind of gothic. And I was like, I'm in my horror era, so let's read that. So we're doing The Hound of the Baskervilles. And so, Maria, why don't you say first what you've been thinking about the Sherlock Holmes stories and how this one fits into it?
So I find the Sherlock Holmes stories a very comfortable read with enough interest and intrigue to keep you going, but there's a little bit of a safetiness to it. And saying this even in some of the stories where they don't catch the person or it doesn't go the way you want to. In fact, I'd say some of my favorite ones are where Sherlock fucks up and has to be like, man, I didn't read that situation correctly. One of which is my favorite. And I just enjoy it. I find it very easy to listen to. And it's just, I'm going to say that going forward, re-listening to the Sherlock Holmes canon will be a comfort read for me. Specifically this story, I really enjoyed on the first read through. And then when we were reading it now for this, I realized it's a very Sherlock light story. There's a whole period in the middle where Sherlock just fucks off and he's not there. And the play off of between Sherlock and Watson is half the joy. I still really enjoyed it because I find the little tiny bits of this story, because there's a bunch of smaller mystery things happening amidst the larger thing. I still find it really interesting. It's also short. Let me tell you, Doyle knows how to get in and get the fuck out with almost all of his stories. At no point was I like, wow, this is taking too long. And while for the most part I find the narration very straightforward, every once in a while Doyle just throws a really beautiful poetic description of something, and you're like, damn, Watson, did you become a poet out of fucking nowhere? And I find it very enjoyable. The second read through, I will say, while this is definitely a gothic setting and dealing with a gothic tale, I don't find it horror-esque. I definitely think there's a little tiny bit of a creepy setting, but one of the things that we've mentioned previously is sometimes if your main character is a little too chill in the reaction to some things, it keeps you from being scared. And there are multiple points where Watson, who is our point of view character, isn't as creeped out because he's writing this from the future.
He is what we'd call in the literary world retrospective narrator.
Yes, and
Katie is in her pretentious era. No, I'm just kidding.
But yeah, I had a good time. I enjoyed it. I found the minute I turned it on, I was like, those vibes. There's very specific Sherlock Holmes vibes. Also, fuck the adaptations. Why do they make Sherlock an asshole? He's not that big. Listen, this is one of the stories where he does do something asshole-ish to Watson. But, overall, he's not a fucking giant dick ass that is, annoying to everyone all the time.
All right, Katie, what did you think?
It was so clean. It was so, when Maria said the get in, get out, it's squeaky clean. It's so nice to read. It's refreshing. It was so it just economy of words, there were, I don't feel many wasted words. Granted, I think reading it probably would have proven maybe a different opinion. I don't know, because again, audio book is what I listened to, but it was very atmospheric. I felt I really liked the dichotomy between and the stark comparison, like Maria mentioned, where you get the Sherlock light moments and you get the dappled rays of the sunlight came down, and it was as if, and a whole bunch of metaphorical language and stuff. And I think that was really necessary in order to capture the scary folkloric alien moors of this area. that they visit, and to create like that kind of like, gothic tone. So
The horses? The horses
Yeah.
getting lost and squelched down into the mire? Fucking terrifying.
Yeah, so I'm so curious though if he had chosen to write all of this from Sherlock's perspective, how it would have been different, and if how much of a loss that would have provided for the atmosphere of the majority of the novel, especially since at the end of the day it's a ghost tale. So anyway, yeah, it was really fun. I really liked it. I really liked some of the aspects of it that I wasn't really expecting. Like, for example, the description of this one woman that's a character. She's described really like beautifully, but not overtly, and also not like from a male perspective almost. I mean, it is a little bit, but it's what I mean though by that is like it wasn't like her breasts were heaving. Obviously you're not going to get that from Doyle and everything, but like nonetheless, like the way it was described was very romantic. And I don't know, it was really nice. I don't have like, honestly, it was pretty like low key. I didn't love it. I didn't dislike it. It was a nice read. I'm glad we picked it.
So I enjoyed this story a lot. Like Maria and Katie said, it's very clean. And I was mostly interested in the ways that Sherlock, again, is, like Maria was saying, different than how he's portrayed. Where in recent media, he's really more of a wish fulfillment for the author, for the new media author being dickish. And he's not really like that. And I found that very interesting. I did not find this creepy whatsoever. This is not going to be part of my horror era.
No, I wouldn't have chosen it for your horror era. I would have chosen it for some, like, that's why I said it's not creepy vibes, it's British vibes. It's like,
you know what I really liked too is it wasn't just British vibes. It was like folkloric, Celtic, gay, whatever just like that kind of general sense of mystery and like fairy tale-esque stuff with the moors and everything. So that was actually really nice, and it really, again, a nice contrast to the city vibe where like Sherlock was just like, it's like all the gears in the clock ticking away. I'm gonna go take that squeaky toy away from him. I'll be back.
I will say that this story, the mystery would not happen if British people had less social mores and constraints, because like a good part of this book is people not wanting to say things because they're rude and they're not telling you certain information that would just like make things much clearer, much faster, which I thought was very funny. But yeah,
it really is. That whole moment with Barrymore, you're like, my dude.
Just say the thing. I also thought it was interesting that, like, for some reason, I very much thought it was like a police procedural Sherlock stories, and it's not. Like, he doesn't tell the police certain things. It's not even a case brought to him by the police. It's not even really like a murder case per se at certain points. And I enjoyed that. I thought it was very interesting the ways that Sherlock Holmes is different than he's portrayed nowadays, and like. I think it would be kind of cool to do like a few more Sherlock Holmes stories that are a little bit more typically Holmesian.
There are some of the short stories I would love to do with you guys, like if we did like a trio of them, because they're very short, they're easy to get through in a sitting, but there's some of them that really hit on, like, for instance, some of my favorites are the ones where people just come to Sherlock and be like, yo, I got a fucking problem. And then there are the ones that we think about where the police are like, yo, there's a murder, Sherlock, come and look at the crime scene, which follows much more of the police procedural vibe. But I think that really is like the heart of it, is just how much we've been lied to about like the Sherlock Holmes canon by modern adaptations, because
you mean he doesn't go around slapping people in the faces, and he doesn't jump out of windows into the dirty British Thames, and doesn't like capture little flies one by one and discover like whatever their heart, what the hell? Order out of chaos.
Yeah. So, but he does do so. Like there are times where there's this one point where that solution where if you put it in contact with blood, it turns blue. There's a point where he's working with a chemist and he finds that and he's like, oh my God, this is going to revolutionize how we solve crimes. Like this is insane. And so he definitely is a tinkerer. And like, also, did you know when Sherlock retires, he moves to the beachside and raises bees, and that becomes like his magnum opus in his eyes, is his book that he writes on bees.
That's
Like,
really cute.
he's just a fun, quirky guy, and he can sometimes be an asshole, but he almost always is an asshole to people who deserve it. And in situations that deserve it, and he's quite kind. Like, I find him with and his genuine concern for Henry Baskerville in this story very, and like his immediate, like his willingness to be like, oh, I fucked up, and just like, we're so lied to about by a lot of the adaptations.
It really is like, he's just a quirky, smart guy who everyone was like, okay, but what if he was mentally
Also an
ill
asshole.
or pathological to some kind of degree, but by not actually reading the stories. Like, there's one part at the very beginning when the guy comes and who gives him the case and is like, you know, I had to come to you. You're the second best scientific mind in Europe. And Holmes is like, well, who's the first? And he says, this other guy. And Holmes is like, well, maybe you should have gone to him, bitch. And like, he didn't say bitch, but like,
Yeah.
and that was like a funny
was the
moment of
vibe.
him being a little bit of like a, but it's more like he's a little prickly than like,
Yeah, and-
he's
and
an
the guy goes-
maniac or rude.
And the guy goes like, I hope I didn't insult you. And he's like, a little. Maybe just tell me what your problem is. And then once he hears the problem, he's immediately back in.
You know what I really enjoyed also is the humanizing moments, like you said, like when he messes up. When he there's a scene in this book where he is tailing somebody with Watson towards the beginning, and he notices him in a somebody suspicious in a cab, and he says something aloud and like makes eye contact with the guy in the cab, and then like it rushes away and they try to chase after it, and afterwards he's like, I made a mistake. Damn it. I shouldn't have done that thing. And then he's like, well, what else could, Watson's like, what else could you have done? There's no humanly possible way you could have solved that. You could have captured him. And he's like, no, I could have, bye. And then he goes into a very very detailed series of like choices that he would have done that make a lot of sense and are very clever and would work out really great. But I love that his brain in that moment was not fast enough to control his human emotions and stuff to keep him, you know.
Sherlock Holmes, he makes mistakes and then he admits that he makes mistakes, and like that's such a difference. Or even the way that like at one point in the story he does something that kind of insults Watson, and like he apologizes. There's an emotional intelligence to like, I got kind of carried away, Watson, I'm sorry. And it's like that is something that in modern depictions of the Gestalt idea of Holmes he wouldn't do, because we view him as emotionally constipated in a way that heroes nowadays are. And like there's just such a urge, I think, among people to turn him into like some kind of, again, mentally manic kind of a pathological character.
High functioning sociopath.
Yeah.
As
Also-
BBC's Sherlock
Yeah.
does.
manic pixie dream girl, but in the opposite gender. And it was I hypothesize that it was specifically formulated in order to grab that specific audience of people who are just like weirdly obsessed with characters that are morally ambiguous.
Yep.
And that makes them hotter.
And so one of my perfect examples of this that really hits the fundamentals, in when Watson gets married, it happens very early on in the canon. Doyle eventually goes back and adds stories to kind of flush it out. But like in the first book, there's a book published about Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and then there's a collection of short stories. And like by the end of the collection of short stories that was published next, Watson gets married and moves out of 221B Baker Street. And Holmes is like, well, I don't understand why you'd get married. Because he himself, there's a point where Sherlock is like, yeah, I'm not into romance. Like, I don't, I can appreciate, there's three stories that are told from Holmes's point of view specifically. And in one of them, he was like, I myself am not wooed by a pretty face, but I can acknowledge, like, I can look at it and be like, that's a nice ass face. But he himself, and so he's written as this, like, ace and a romantic character. And so he sees Watson get married and he's like, but we were having fun here. Like, why would you go do that? But he doesn't throw a fit. He's not angry. He doesn't get pouty. He's just like,
You mean he
literally
doesn't
just
have a what's it called?
a tantrum.
No, the when you have a unhealthy relationship that you're attached to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mean he's not codependent on this random dude?
Yeah, and he also is like supportive of Watson, and like once Watson moves in with his wife and starts his own medical practice, Sherlock will be like, "Hey, you busy? I have a problem," or like, "Do you have a lot of practice stuff? Can I borrow you?" And Watson's wife meets Sherlock through a case, like, and met Watson through a case, so she's like, "You boys go do you," like, and so they're like, it's so cool. I love it. And while like there's a point where later him and Sherlock move back in together and he's like, let's hope you don't do anything dumb like get married again. But like that's the sum total of his reaction.
Divorced from Mary?
No, she dies.
Oh, that's right. I remember
Really?
that.
Yeah, and it's so it's given to you in such a where it talks about like Watson just had a real bad year. Like, it was not a good year for Watson. And he ends up eventually moving back into Baker Street with Holmes. And it's just like, and they're just bros. And then there's this one story that would be one of the ones we did where Watson gets shot and Holmes goes so hard. He's so angry because he genuinely cares for this person so much. And I just hate that, like, in both of the adaptations in the one where they decided to make Sherlock a Marvel character, the movie ones.
The movie
and
one
then
with
in the BBC one,
RDJ.
when Watson gets married, like, Sherlock is such a dick. Like, he's such a dick.
He is, yeah.
And I don't understand it, because he's just so different in the books, and I would say that's the biggest thing. Now, I do want to just reference, as I'm sure you two noticed, and as anyone who read this noticed, this book goes into, what is that thing called when you judge people by their
Phrenology?
skulls? Phrenology. There's a character
As like a quirk of one of the characters. Isn't that kind of cute?
Yeah, and for obvious reasons, problematic. Like, there's a point where Sherlock is like, could you tell this person's skull from this person's skull? And the doctor's like, of course I could. It's my special interest. And Sherlock is like, well, of course I could tell this other thing. What kind of newspaper was based on a clip of the print. And so while none of the main characters have that view, and Sherlock specifically talks about it as something as this character is into, and it's not something that, like, Sherlock never uses it.
But it's just like a fun quirk. And so like it's very weird to see it.
Yeah, it is very weird to see it. And it's one of the stories that, so like the story where Watson meets his wife is problematic because there is a crazy native from a land that, and you're like, ooh, I don't, and it's a great story otherwise. Like, it's so, and it's got a little like intensity to it.
Okay, look, this was long ago.
Exactly.
And he's British.
Yes.
For the love of God.
And that's the unfortunate thing is there like, and Doyle loved his Britishness. I think one of the other stories that I love is there was a point where Doyle retroactively wrote a story about Holmes stopping German spies from learning all of the secrets of the
Crown.
British Navy and the Crown, and he like single-handedly stops him, and it's the only story written in third person where it's not from Watson's point of view and it's not from Sherlock's point of view. It is just written in third person, and then like this character is like, I was Sherlock all along, and then Watson pops up and they're like, wow, and it became a symbol for like the British people of like, here's our national fictitious hero defeating the people and helping us defeat the people. And Sherlock is unfortunately very tied to a lot of those things.
Like
I
Captain
noticed
America
it a little bit in this one in terms of class, that there's a little bit of like, he's a very middle class writer who like likes the middle class, like or not the middle class, like the gentry type of a thing. Because there is very much still a class distinction drawn in this story, and the story to a certain extent is about like, okay, there's a new mall in town and we got to keep the new mall going, which is a rich person to help the town out. And I'm like, is it helping the town out or not? But he's not a Marxist writer who's going to like interrogate that. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, okay, it's kind of taken as a given. But we should probably
get started.
Well, just explain the plot. I think this is interesting. people are not necessarily super here for the plot. But one thing I will say just before we keep going is that I would actually really be interested in reading some Agatha Christie books now.
I would like
Because
to read some Agatha Christie.
I really liked her stuff when I was younger because it's so clean and cute and like just it works really well. But
I never read an Agatha Christie book.
Oh,
I
they're
only
fun.
read Boxcar Children and Nancy Drew.
well,
I hated the Boxcar Children. It was depressing.
in the library trailer, the mobile library that they would bring to your park was
You know,
those
I
the
did
only
not grow
option?
up in a trailer park, bro.
This is a small channel with very humble subscribers, but we punch outside of our leagues with our patrons. As long as our patrons are happy, we will do the books that they are happy with. But when I say patrons, do I mean in like a Venetian Renaissance way? Are the Medicis our patrons, Maria?
No, we are a podcast of the people. We are
Proletariat.
the proletariat. We are by patrons we mean Patreon patrons because we have a Patreon. I know it's gonna be such a surprise, guys. You have no idea. You've never heard us say it once. Maybe this is your first video, in which case weird video to pick, bro. I don't know why the algorithm would push this one on you, but you know, maybe you really like Sherlock Holmes stuff. I don't know. I can't judge your life, but we have a Patreon. It has 3 tiers. Tier 1.
Because we're capitalist pigs.
Unfortunately, while we would love to not be, we live in a capitalist society and need to eat.
We are supported by the people through direct labor. We are not the bourgeoisie. Our money does not make money for us.
That is true. It's the arts, if anything.
It's also democratic. We're building we're building community for the proletariat, and it's democratic in terms of what direction we take.
Is there a Agatha Christie Christmas story?
Oh, that would be great, actually. Also, that is a fair point. I guess at one point you do evolve into like a socialist kind of like vibe where everybody's giving everything to everyone, so it's an exchange of we're the bartering system of YouTube. Yeah, we are the bartering Patreon. We barter.
And what do you get when you barter with us? Tier 1 is our basic patron tier, and you get access to our really cool Discord, and you get early access to our videos. We post them a day before with no ads, which is great. Do you like ads? I hate ads. Fuck them. Who needs them?
I just upgraded my Netflix. It's because I couldn't stand any more ads on my Netflix for the cheapest tier. So
there's ads on Netflix?
Oh, there is a shit ton of ads
There's
on
now
Netflix
ads
now.
on HBO. It's crazy.
Yeah, I literally upped my pay from $6 a month to $15 a month just to avoid the ads.
And our Discord's cool, filled with cool, fun, sexy people who like to write and read and talk about. I think I saw people were talking
mental
about
depression.
I mean that, but also, you know, movies that have come out, YouTube videos. I found a lot of cool creators and video essays because people shared it on the Discord, and I found it that way. So like, come on, talk to cool, sexy people. Who doesn't want to do that? And then tier 2, we have our book club, which this is one of our videos for. Two times a month we do a live stream. One is our mid-month book. Will picks a book and everybody reads it together like a little happy family. And then at the end of the month we have our book club pick, where all of our members can nominate books. Will pick 3 to 4, and then everybody votes on which of those ones they want to read. So sometimes we end up reading books that I'm like, how the hell did we get here? And Will's like, it was a book club book, and I'm like, fair enough for the people.
What would you say? What would you say is the worst one we've read?
Oh God, Stardust Thief. Not Stardust.
You really didn't like that, did you?
It was just such a nothing book that we shouldn't have read. Like because it was like we were just, it was like kicking someone who's disabled. I will also say one of the great things about our book club, usually when you start a book club, there's the problem that nobody reads it, and also that they pick stupid books, and then people have stupid opinions about the books. That's not a problem. Or if they do have disagreements, they're very mean and nasty. Here, there's enough people that someone is always reading the book. There's a channel of the Discord to talk about it. We try to pick good books, but again, democracy is not always great. The people, we 3 are at least going to say good, smart opinions. And 4, when there are disagreements, they are very
private.
They're very
Not
well.
even
They're not.
that.
They're very polite.
Right. And people can talk through like they can disagree about a book. I mean, as you see, we disagree about stuff all the freaking time. But in our Discord, our patrons will disagree about something
Well-
in the book or a thing, and then they just like can talk it through, and then sometimes get to a point where they go, agree to disagree, bro, and move on. Or
Well,
like
what's nice is the majority of the people that you'll come into contact with our Patreon and so on forth on Discord are people who are like academic in nature when it comes to writing. People who truly love like the craft itself. So maybe not academic. That's how I see it, is when you know something in and out and like that is academic. But I guess you could also just say like artists. They are artists. You are an artist of the word. So everybody just values more learning and figuring stuff out than pointing fingers and saying I'm better than you are. So yeah, come enjoy.
And then our final tier, our parasocial darlings, where you get access to Katie and Will's critique stream, where they look at a book and specifically look at the prose and how words are being used to describe things, elicit feelings, all of that jazz. It's much more micro commentary than our macro commentary that we normally do. Also, Katie has her KFC corner, which is Katie's fiction corner, where she critiques and does basically writing workshops, like you
Not
did in
just
college.
Either.
So it's a whole group.
Yep, it's now bloomed into a several person thing, and you may join yourself if you would like, where we all take a look at something and then over the course of 2 weeks and then convene together, discuss over the course of an hour, one person's work, and then over the course of another person's work, and that's that.
Join and support independent journalism. Now,
And if you can't do that,
Maria.
please subscribe and like and maybe comment.
Or just share the video. Just share the video.
That too. You don't even have to actually share it. You can just go copy link. And then YouTube will be like, oh, wow, you like this enough to
Really?
share it. It doesn't have to know. Yes. It
That's so
reads,
funny.
it tracks what you like go to share. And if you hit copy link, you don't even have to send it to someone. It's automatically going to be like, oh, bitch, you like this enough to copy the link and send it to people? It doesn't know that you didn't
Baby,
actually
tell me
send it.
more.
Tell me more. Maybe I should show this thing to other people. So, like, I don't know. Do that. I'd like
do
that.
that. All right, Maria. Who is the Hound of the Baskervilles?
So this book, obviously, Sherlock Holmes book. This is a story set on the moors of Dartmoor in England, and the basic premise is there is a old family, the Baskervilles, that for about 200 years have been haunted by this mythological family specter, the Hound, which one of their ancestors was a real dick and did something not great and was murdered by a giant monstrous hellhound that came out of nowhere. And now everyone else in the family is like, yikes. Maybe
Awkward.
the Hound will get us. And then the last, the newest baronet of the Baskervilles was killed from fright and died mysteriously. And people were like, that was a pauper, and maybe it's the Hound of the Baskervilles. And so somebody comes to Sherlock Holmes and is like, yo, help, I don't know what's happening. We're getting a new baronet. He's flying in from America. Like, I don't want him to die, but I also need him to live there because, as Will mentioned, the mall that is supporting the town, the idea is the previous baronet was super freaking wealthy. Like, he had a fuck ton of cash, and he was like, invest in the community, y'all. Charity, infrastructure, making buildings, reviving the
The
manor.
new guy too, Henry Baskerville, who is the inheritor of this great sum and property that is the baronet we speak of. I like his idea too, where it's like, yeah, whoever gets the property gets the money too, because how are you going to take care of a property of that size without the money to support it? And I'm like, oh my God, how refreshing.
How refreshing. But anyway, and so they're like, we need him to move into this house, but also the last person died mysteriously. There's this thing about a hound, and is there murder afoot? We don't know. Help us, Sherlock Holmes. And that's the basic premise. Holmes then goes on to figure out what the fuck's going on.
It's interesting because it is kind of a gothic setup of like the past affecting the new person coming to the creepy manor, but like it doesn't really feel gothic in tone too much because, again, like Maria was saying, like Watson is just too practical of a character to be caught up in any of that, like, you know, that stuff. I would also say that the prose are very restrained and straightforward, and so it's not really like, it doesn't really create much of an atmosphere. Most Mostly, I don't read a lot of mystery books, so I was kind of curious to see how the structure of this worked and like how it unfolded. And it's interesting because there is kind of a very there is a way he unveils like one new information point at a time, and you're like, oh, this shoe thing is going to be important because otherwise, why are they spending so much time on it and that kind of a thing.
And so it kind of makes you also the detective in a way, which is really a nice effect to be had. So like every time the plot introduced some type of element that obviously was going to come back, it almost felt like you're in a video game and you see the thing highlighted and you're like, oh, that's important. Like that's basically how I felt when those moments happened. And I'm like, oh, that's really like, I don't want to say cute because that sounds demeaning, but that's really a nice way to get the reader to feel like they themselves are truly the detective and such.
And that's one of the magics of the Sherlock Holmes books versus the a lot of the like especially the BBC adaptation, where a lot of Sherlock's deductive reasoning is just happening in his fucking mind palace, and he's just sitting, and words appear on a thing, and you're like, what the fuck? And not to say that Sherlock in the book will tell you shit. he very like he sparses out what he gives to Watson. So sometimes Sherlock knew things for a while that he doesn't say. So it's not that he's the most like giving you, but you see a lot of the stuff Sherlock does. The novel goes over it and gives it to you, and then you get how he interpreted it later. And that's one of the magic of the series, is it's known to be like to make you think, and Sherlock throughout the entire series is like, as long as you have a logical, rational mind and you assess the evidence in front of you and you learn how to make deductive reasoning, anyone can do what I do. I am not special. I've just fucking trained.
And it's kind of cool too because I have complained before about magic with more steps, where a character supposedly has a thing that they can do that's not magic. So I use the example of the mind powers in Dune, of like computation in your mind and being able to control your own emotions, which makes sense up to a certain point of being like, oh, okay, if this person does this, then this is one possible future. But then like it becomes magic with more steps, where like you just skip the middle step of how they got there and it becomes unconcrete. And this doesn't do that, whereas like BBC Sherlock does and other Sherlocks do. So like this one starts actually with someone having left a cane in Holmes's office, and Watson being like, and Holmes being like, oh, what can you tell about this cane? And Watson is like, oh, I've been studying your method. I can tell that it was a this and a that and a this and whatever by this. And Holmes is like, oh, you have done well with the method. I found it, very illuminating what you said. Watson's like,
but you're completely wrong.
You're completely wrong. And he's like, what? And he's like, because you got it so wrong, I found it helpful. It's such a funny thing.
It is, but it's also kind of sweet. It's because he's obviously fond enough of Watson that he is like letting him grow. Like it's like letting a kid try to like pour their own milk type of thing. It's like, wow, you just spilled it all over the place, but you did a really good job trying. Yeah. And so it's kind of like a nice, like almost parental or bigger brother kind of vibe for it. It doesn't feel like a bigger brother, but like it's like a mentor mentee type of moment. And it's just funny. It's because like all those same details that he deducted from are just slightly different. And then, Holmes corrects him on all those points.
And he did get one thing correct, which was country doctor who walked a lot, based on the... and it's so funny because throughout the entire series, like the whole fucking canon, there were points where Sherlock says something and Watson's like, how the fuck did you know? And I'm like, Watson, can you say, oh, what gave it away? Like what was but he's like, how could you have possibly? And I'm like, it's fucking Sherlock, Watson. It's been like 30 years at this point. Can you get with it?
So what's really funny though is the place Maria and I both worked at, the tutoring center that we had worked at together, one of the materials that the kids got tested on was an excerpt from the first Sherlock Holmes. And it does it immediately on the first page too, where he's just like, how can you not know this thing? Or how can you know this thing? And it's just really funny how he's just constantly like baffled by everything that he is.
People do at a couple points in the story be like, "Oh my God, Sherlock, you're so smart," and like I think maybe that's part of where the Gestalt idea comes from Sherlock as like a high
Super
functioning
special,
sociopath. Yeah,
extra
super
boy.
special
Yeah.
exactly, like oh my gosh. But like in the comments says Chris M says if you pay attention you can figure it out. We can't now, but maybe back then especially you could.
But especially back then, like maybe you could if you knew more about the world or whatever. But it very much has that like, okay, this is all very concrete. None of this is just made up.
And the other thing that I want to talk about right now, while Will figures out why his sound just went poop, is that it's crazy because this is one of those stories where it's like, could there be a supernatural edge? Sherlock, are you dancing with the supernatural? And Sherlock's like, absolutely not. Rational explanation, rational. And then it is a rational explanation. And it's crazy because Doyle was fanatically into the supernatural to the point where he got into a fight with Harry Houdini because Houdini was like, I'm a magician, these are tricks, none of it is real. And Doyle was like, no, you're a super cool fancy, you're so magical, you don't know you're magical. And they split up, like they stopped talking, their friendship fell apart. And from that point on, Doyle spoke badly about Houdini. And it affected Doyle his whole life because he would be taken in by charlatans. And then when the charlatans were publicly came out and would be like, I was faking it, or like they were proven wrong, it made Doyle look like a complete idiot. And he just bought into all of this magic, like seances and all of that shit so hard. And yet somehow never let Sherlock meet a supernatural problem that was truly supernatural. He was so dedicated to his rational, grounded detective that he never let his personal ideas about the supernatural ever even touch Sherlock. There's never a point where you're like, maybe it was supernatural. Nope. Not
and it's
Holmes,
interesting,
baby.
Because it's not like he was afraid to let Sherlock Holmes be outsmarted because, like, not Christine Daae. What's the famous female character from the Holmes canon?
Irene Adler.
Irene Adler. Like, he gets outsmarted in that story. It's not like Doyle was like, oh no, only my special man, he can't be outsmarted by anything. And so, yeah, it does seem to just have been like, maybe he realized it didn't make for a good story or something like that. But yeah, it's so funny that he was so intent in real life, and then in fiction, he was like, okay, but
no, there's no supernatural. It's crazy.
You know what's funny is this is one of the books, I think, or not just this book, I'm sure each book, where knowing the author and things about the author make it better.
Yeah, like that piece of information makes you respect the decision he made in the story. Also, this is the start of the supernatural mystery genre. Like, this is the first time you have like a homegrown, one of the first times, and in the English literature canon, it's considered the originator of that trope, where it looks like it's going to be a supernatural thing, but then the story is like, haha, it was practical all along. Scooby-Doo owes its genesis to the Hounds of the Hound of Baskerville.
Well, so you could almost say Scooby-Doo is the descendant of the Baskerville Hound.
Exactly. He absolutely is.
Same canon, same universe, same cinematic universe, confirmed.
Exactly.
Ruh-roh, apparently. That what a bizarre
connection to make. You're welcome. I thought about that. But yeah, and it's just it does help make the story like work. And I think we can go a little bit over to like the heart of like the mystery of this story and how he very cleverly gives you little breadcrumbs to put it together. And there are times where the characters are wrong about something and you as the reader are like, oh no, I remember this thing you mentioned earlier and I know that that's not actually the dead Henry Baskerville. Because he gives you clues for it. So the story, as I mentioned before, Henry Baskerville comes to the UK. He's been living in the US, knocking about for a while. And now he's a baronet, but there's a plot, and he's like, this is really weird.
Question, what is a baronet?
It's a small baron.
Is.
Well, that's what I thought. So is it a baron?
It's just below.
Okay.
A baronet. Yeah. Like British levels of hierarchy within the
There's so much.
there's
So-
a lot.
Whenever I play Crusader Kings, I want to kill myself when it comes to the political stuff because or no, not the political, the diplomatic stuff, the diplomatic side of things. Because I'm like, oh my god,
Aristocracy's fucking crazy.
Then when I tried to play the Middle East, I was like, this is too much. There's like a million vocabulary words that I just don't know. Anyway, sorry.
Well, it's just hundreds of years of people running to get their credit for being a little higher or a little lower than somebody else. And it kind of builds up and builds up. We should talk a little bit about, oh yeah, no, you were. Okay. So Baronet comes in.
yeah.
He has a hilarious American accent.
He does. The author or the narrator for the version Will and I read is Stephen Fry, who has one American accent that he can do. Like, and that is it. And he's like, he hears the story about the Hound, and he's like, yeah, I knew about the Hound. I grew up as a Baskerville. People told me about it. I didn't think it was real, and real strange that my uncle died so terribly, but like, what are you gonna do? I'm gonna go in. And so you get this idea that he's just like a action first, questions later kind of guy. And
I have a crush on Henry Baskerville.
on Henry Baskerville?
I mean, I can't help but picture. So I listened to the free version or whatever, the dollar version of the audiobook.
Ours was absolutely free. The entire canon, the whole thing.
Well, I paid $1. And so anyway, I listened, as I was listening to it, I was like, when he gets angry, a little bit into the story, and his Scottish accent, or it's not Scottish. They say what, Western dialect or something like that.
His more Western, his stronger American accent.
Yeah. Anyway, when it came out, I was like, oh my, sir.
Henry.
And then later, when he grips her by the waist and goes like that, and I'm just like, oh, woo me, sir. Man, these American men.
Yeah, Henry Baskerville he's a time, and also just there's this because he's young. There's the moment when he first sees the moors and the
I know and how he falls in love with it.
Yeah, and he's like, he's just so earnest. But anyway, immediately a weird thing has happened to him. So on top of our boy Sherlock being like, this is an interesting problem. I suspect that maybe it was a murder and there is a problem happening. Henry was given a note that said, don't go to Baskerville Hall. Stay the fuck out of the moors for your own good, buddy. And it's written in newspaper words, like just cut out bits of newspaper text with the only word that has been handwritten as the moor. And this is one of the first scenes where you also get to see Sherlock, stretch some of his I notice shit for a living muscles. But that happens. And then another weird thing has happened. One of Sir Henry's boots was stolen. He bought a brand new set of boots, put them outside to get cleaned, and he goes the next morning. There's only one. And Sherlock's like, I don't know if that's important. Yeah, weird thing to happen. And then the next day, what do you fucking know? His other boot, his old boot, is stolen, and his new one was returned. And now Sherlock's like, oh, fucking yeah, this is important. And you as the reader are like, ooh, I wonder how this is going to be important. And we don't make the connection or I don't know if you guys did. Did you guys see the boot go missing and go, ooh, it's going to be for scenting?
No, not at all.
But
I was like, yeah, no, I was just like, oh, okay. Why?
Katie,
and then
so
I just
loud.
let it happen, and then when it happened later, I was like, oh, that makes sense. But I also think the whole concept of the mystery that we will unveil is just really silly. Like, I'm just murder him. Just murder him. You don't have to do all this other legwork.
It's funny because it makes sense for Charles Baskerville's death. Like, it makes sense why he went that way because, you don't have to get... But for Henry Baskerville's hysterical, I love it. But anyway, and so Holmes also gets the idea that somebody is following our Mr. Henry Baskervilles. And so he tries to find them. This is that scene that Katie mentioned earlier where he sees someone in a cab. And by a cab, it's literally like a barouche with like a horse. Like these are horse-drawn cabs.
Weirdly enough, this is my second favorite scene just because when so as they're tailing Henry Baskerville, and he notices out of the corner of his eye the tail that's in the cab, and like I said before earlier in the video,
Stream.
stream, whatever. How he messes up by making eye contact or something, showing that he noticed. And the guy runs off. Then afterwards, he gives his series of events. I just really, really enjoyed how, I don't know how else to say it, even though we've said it a million times, but it's just really crystal clear and just succinct and to the point, and I understood it, and it didn't seem bombastic the way he said he would do the things. And then I loved the sequence of events afterwards where he's like, oh, okay, so we have this extra clue, and so in order to confirm certain things and try to locate the person, he does all these different things that he had, that it shows that he has tools and people in the city at his disposal from previous workings, that he has those connections, that he is like, you know, in the middle of the spider web pulling at all the strings that he has control over, which is a really cool picture to have of Sherlock Holmes, and I've always enjoyed that in all the iterations that they've had before.
I think the key to it is he is practical, not pretentious. And this is something that sometimes the adaptations get wrong, is they make him a little too pretentious in his like, big brain machinations. And Book Sherlock is just like, oh no, this would have been obviously the better way to handle this situation. Dumb on me for getting it wrong. And it's just because Katie's very much right. When he explains the way he thinks through things, you're like, oh, damn, that completely makes sense. I see how you got there, buddy. Like there's a point later where he smells perfume on a piece of paper and he was like, there's a woman involved who wrote this piece of paper, and it's a specific perfume. And but it's all very like, Sherlock is never talking down to the reader or to, I mean, sometimes he talk it down to Watson a little bit, but for the most part he's just,
but he's still fond of him.
but he's explaining what's happening. But yeah, so they lose the tail in the cabbie, and they end up tracking down that cab driver because he got the license plate. And the cab driver's like, oh, it was a detective named Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock's like, oh God, this guy knows who I am. He knows I'm involved. And he was like, fuck you, I'm going to give your name to the cab driver. So the cab, like, and so it gets back to you. And he's like, Sherlock's like, this is a foe. This guy is quick on his feet. He's got a fucking plan, and he's cheeky. Watson, this is a big story. There's something happening, because those things let Sherlock know that whatever is happening, it is big, it is complicated, and it is like there is a web. It is a
web. Yeah.
It is a web. And then Sherlock is like, okay, buddies, Henry, go to Baskerville Hall, take Watson with you. He's a good guy to have in a tight spot. I'm stay here. I have a blackmail case I have to solve. Watson, send me letters about what's going on. Toodle pip, boyos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
and this...
you know what's funny is that there's later on a scene where basically Watson is on the moors and they're trying to locate a felon, which we'll get to later. But he sees a figure in the distance that's very tall, thin, and like stumped over the moors, looking like he's inspecting things. And I was like, oh, so Sherlock's there. It's because like who else is gonna be described like that?
And then just fucking watching shit. But yeah, so Sherlock is like, bye guys, and thus starts the Sherlock Light portion of the thing, which is also cute because Watson is trying so hard to be good Sherlock substitute boy. And figure things out. And this also starts where things getting a little bit more poetic, and I think some of the best description happens as they are on their way to Baskerville Hall, as Henry Baskerville is kind of seeing it for the first time, but specifically there's this one scene where all the leaves have fallen, so we're in fall. All of the leaves have fallen off the trees, and it's kind of this gold carpet, and Watson says something akin to the trees had already shed their gifts before Henry could get here. And there's this melancholic, like, out of place, out of time kind of thing where, like, this space is just kind of run down, old feeling. And even the natural beauty has kind of begin to fall. Like, the leaves are down. You don't have all the
This made me
want
to read This made me want to read like one of the Bronte sisters who talk about the majesty and the bleakness of the moors, you know?
Yeah.
Like that has such a inherent interest.
Yeah, it also reminded me of that one story we read that we ended up not liking, but the one that had like almost like 3 stories in it.
All the Meringue Bones.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah.
It reminded me a lot of that. So if you like that vibe, that's a great book for it, but it was weird. But anyway, no. It was the apples that had fallen from the trees, and so they had already shed all of their. So it was almost
They're
like
gifts
this kind
for
of.
Henry.
Yeah. So the way he describes it, it's like, he's getting paltry welcome in comparison to almost the way he should perhaps, like, because of his station and because it's like his land basically, right? So but yeah, no, I really like that. And then after that, like it's really cool too. It's because it's first described very beautifully, like golden lighty, like, you know, daylight, and then once they get to Baskerville Manor or whatever, Hall, thank you. There, it's just it's like what was it called, The Woman in Black or whatever, with Daniel Radcliffe. That's what I was picturing the whole time, was that house, because of the way the moors like come off right off the you know, the house
The
itself.
grounds, yeah.
It's like living in the middle of a bog.
Yep. That's definitely the vibe that it has. And just like they get there, it's kind of dark, it's gloomy. And immediately Watson hears in the night that night someone crying. There's a woman wailing, and he's like, that's weird. Also, the entire time on their way from the train station to Baskerville Hall, they kept seeing people with guns, and they were like, what the fuck is up? And there is a convict on the loose. A crazy murderer who was like so violent. Holmes back in London was like, interesting story, let me take notes. So Watson knew of this particular convict, and you're like, ooh, I wonder how this is going to fit into it. And then you hear a woman wailing in the night. And again, in a story where Watson was less practical of a human, and like if it had affected him a ton and been like, you know, this could have been a very spooky, ominous feeling. It does have it, like it happened, and you're like, oh my god, why is there a woman wailing? Like, who is it? Guilt? Is it like? And because you're in detective mode, where you're like, is it guilt? Oh. Did the Barrymores? Because they're like, are the Barrymores the ones that killed Charles Baskerville? Because they'd get, if no one lives in the hall, they get a cool home forever.
The Barrymores are the family that have been serving the Baskerville family, and so they're like staff at the
it's
hall.
The butler and the housekeeper that are married. Yeah. And so you're like, ooh, are the Barrymores guilty? You know, like all of these things you're reading because this is a detective novel. Where in a gothic novel, this would have been given for creepy creep. In a detective novel, you're like, another layer to the mystery. Why is there a wailing woman?
It is almost like Doyle was like, you know what? I'm kind of bored. I want to write a gothic horror, but with Sherlock Holmes. And so like it has the elements of a gothic horror, but it's really not horrific. It's which actually kind of works because he's so good at writing Sherlock Holmes stories and mysteries.
Yes.
And what's nice is that since you get this was actually something I wanted to discuss. I thought it was curious that we have so many different perspectives and medium for the narration. Say, for example, we have gotten kind of like, we always are in Watson's perspective, but there's like, you know, the focus and the narration style when Sherlock's involved. And then, of course, the switch that we've already mentioned when he goes to the area and describes it in its almost magical essence. And then we switch like narration into letters to Sherlock, where we're given information, I'm assuming either on a daily basis at the end of the day or like when interesting things happen, which might mean maybe multiple days or something is what I understood it to be. And then after that, a few times we switch to Watson's journal because he feels that it would be fresher in his mind for him to access the details of the day and then, you know, to transfer instead of waiting to write the letter. And my question is, I guess, is like, why do you think he chose to do that? And what do you think the positive effect is on the storytelling?
I think it almost doesn't change it a lot because we're already in a diegetic kind of Watson is writing this, or Watson is writing this later on, so it actually almost doesn't really change the narration style at all. I think maybe it's just kind of like a fun thing he wanted to do.
I also think it adds realism. We know he's writing Sherlock letters the whole time, and so getting to see the letters and specifically what Watson is not just interacting with in his memory, but the things that at the time he thought was important to share to Holmes, specifically, can be read as interesting. And then the journal entries are like, so they're, depending on how he's writing it, there's slightly different tense usage happening.
Yeah,
and for me,
which does affect how you experience the sequence of events.
Yes. And like what is being processed in the parts where he's writing kind of coherently from the past, like, or from the future. There's a much more, here's little tidbits of extra information versus when he's writing the journal entries or the letters, we're kind of in that moment. But for the most part, I just think he did it for realism and for funsies. I don't think it's, like, I remember reading it this time going, I wonder, because we also have the story of the Hound of Baskervilles, which was written in like an old family book. That's the first piece of alternate like narrative that we're given. And so there's just these three pieces of different ways of telling, like, getting the story that's happening. And also, I think he did it because Sherlock specifically is going to talk about the things that were useful and not useful from Watson's letters, and these are the specific ones that he references, maybe? I don't know. That's about it. That's what I got.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree in saying that he just did it for funsies. I did think it was just interesting, though. It's because I think it made it more interesting. That was redundant. I think it made it more interesting in general of a read, and I think it helped the pacing. It's because, number one, if we were to follow him in his active narration day to day, that would have slowed down the pacing a lot, or we would have been jumping through time, but without the fun of the recollection of the past, of like, because otherwise we'd be constantly getting flashbacks, and that would be like super cumbersome for us to like have the same passage of time to so that way we have like the, you know, the development of the characters and everything like that between each other and what's going on as far as like the mystery goes. But again, you'd be bogged down by the flashbacks. So instead you were given the letters to Sherlock, because that makes sense because he said he would write. And then in order to provide even more detail to make it seem more like we're getting like firsthand events, we are given the journals. So I think that's why that was made. But I don't know if that was like an active choice or just so happened to work that way.
I'm sure it was. I feel like Doyle is so, I don't want to say a sparse writer, but he's so, he doesn't have a lot of extra fluff going on, that if he did that, it was a very conscious choice in what he was doing. Almost all of his stories have that like leanness to them, that at least in the Sherlock Holmes canon. So if he's doing something different, like, it is adding to that. If you don't mind, I will get us back on the plot recap.
Yes.
So the next day, Henry Baskerville has a lot of paperwork to do. So Watson's like, I'm gonna go out about town. Sherlock told me to get friendly with the neighbors. I'm gonna go meet some people. So he goes, he sees Dr. Mortimer, he meets this weird lawyer. This guy isn't a lawyer, but he's incredibly litigious as a human, which is this tiny...
He's an HOA member. That's what he fucking is, and he's so annoying.
It's so annoying, but I fucking loved it. Like, it's just this weird, like, there's this one just weird guy in town who just sues everybody all the time and argues different sides of, like, in one case, he's like, for the people, and in the other case, he's a private property person, and it just, no rhyme or reason, he just loves it.
Yeah, the troll of the moors.
Yes. But the really interesting thing that happens is while he's walking, this guy named Stapleton comes up and is like, "Oh, are you John Watson? I'm Stapleton, who Mortimer." So Mortimer is the doctor who left his cane earlier, and who is the one who originally brings the mystery to Holmes, and Mortimer's the Baskervilles' physician. But they were Charles Baskerville, Mortimer, and Stapleton were all good friends, and they like hung out a lot. And so Stapleton is a naturalist, which immediately Watson knows who he is because he's got his little butterfly catching thing and he's wearing like a hat and he has all the like pockets and stuff. And he's like, oh, is Sherlock Holmes coming? We know about Sherlock and you in this.
So as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, so he's the one. Spoilers, I guess. But yeah, that really that tipped me off a lot. So it's because I'm like, okay, come on, man. Like, eat your nerdy little get up running up to him with your
I thought it was an element because there's a couple elements in the story of like, oh,
red herrings.
It's like a nod to people who have read Sherlock Holmes before of like, oh, this is the character from that case. And so I thought it was like a cute little like, oh, people know Sherlock Holmes in universe, like you know him out in universe. But you're right, yeah.
Yeah. It unfortunately does do that. It's immediately you're like, you're very interested in Sherlock, buddy.
Oh,
and he takes he's like, come to my house, I'll take you through the moors. And they go to Merripit House, which is where Mr. Stapleton lives with his sister. I say that specifically because we're gonna learn something later, so pin that. And he's like telling Watson about the moors, and he's like, I love them, great bugs and stuff, but also you see those lighter green holes? That's a bog. We lose horses in there all the time. Last night I heard a horse went in, never came out, heard it crying, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh look, there's another one, and there's a horse head like
conveniently.
Yeah. Like and then
so
you
comedic.
hear yeah, and you hear it wailing as it gets sucked down into the moors, and Watson's like,
that's
That's
kind of
creepy.
bro.
Yeah. The exuberance with which he delivers his knowledge on that is very funny, in my opinion, and also very off-putting, which also then heightened my suspicion. Afterwards, I'm like, bro, why are you liking this so much?
Why are you such a creep? Out the gate, Stapleton's a fucking creep.
He is.
And I think it works because the entire time you're like, what's your game, Stapleton? And it gets worse the more you learn about him. So I actually think that it is not a bad thing to immediately have the reader be like, I'm off-put by this guy. Angry Otter also says, plus Stapleton was such a jerk. It made him quite obviously the bad guy.
Yeah, he was. As soon, like, immediately with the when he started getting defensive of his sister and stuff in like weird ways, I was like, all right, this is just off-putting. First of all, you like bugs, which personally I also like bugs, but I've been told many a times it's weird. So first of all, you like bugs, which is weird, and second of all, what are we like it puts the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again. He has like moths in his basement, and so like instant
to defend in context, this would have read way less weird. Naturalism, collecting bug specimens was
No,
huge
I know.
at this time. Huge.
No,
it would
I
have
know
been
it
quite
is.
normal.
The Animal Crossing person in me was like, oh, I wonder how many he has in his collection. No, obviously I know that with the background, but it's just like also the isolation of being that kind of person and being with your. The whole situation was fishy to me. Okay, who lives with their sister that long in the middle of nowhere when your sister's that hot. And
that's the problem. When you realize his sister's super hot, you're like, why isn't she married, bro? Because, like, listen, brother,
She has a lisp. That was weird.
Because she speaks Spanish with a Spanish accent.
Oh, shouldn't you know
Yes.
that?
That's not how it's portrayed in the audiobook.
Yeah, it was an odd. The way he decided to do the lisp was odd. It was only when you realize their manservant, Anthony/Antonio, also had the lisp that you're like, oh, this is a regional thing. They were from South America. They're probably speaking Spanish with a Spanish
Oh, I
accent.
did not catch that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't catch that at all, especially because my narrator didn't have any type of accent for her. She was just British.
Oh no, she has a weird accent and a lisp in this because she's from South America. But anyway, we'll get to that later. But anyway, so yeah, he's hanging out with Stapleton, and Stapleton's like, oh yeah, anyone who goes in through the moors, they're probably gonna die, but I have a special path that I've made markers for myself, so I can get through it.
Which
and
makes
like
him even more suspicious.
Yeah, because at one point Watson's like, "Oh, maybe I'll go in," and he's like, "No, buddy. You like unless you know where my markers are, you'll die. You see that horse? That'll be you, bro." And one of the things that this does do is it sets the moors up as this very treacherous place that like shit can go wrong in, which is going to connect to stuff later. Doyle is really good at being like, "I'm going to lay something here. I'm just going to lay it. Don't worry about it." And then it comes back later and you're like, ho, ho, ho. He's so economical about what he mentions. It's fucking fantastic. Because, like, that annoying lawyer, that guy, not a lawyer, the annoying litigious guy, that guy is going to come in useful. He's not just character for the town. He is going to serve a purpose in this story. When you talk about an economical writer who's so specific with what he mentions and doesn't mention, you cannot get better than Doyle. It is insane.
It's so satisfying to see things come full circuit and to actually prove purpose. It's because I feel like there's so much, again, like extra shit in books just for the sake of like creating atmosphere, or just for the sake of artificially generating a moment between characters, instead of allowing, just use what you need and you will figure out what you can do with those few things very creatively, as long as you keep it clean.
It reminded me a lot of Agatha Christie, who, again, you're like, okay, if there's an element that comes up, it's going to come up later.
Yes.
Pay attention. It's going to fit in later.
Yeah, and it makes you a very active reader, because you're like, oh, how's this going to fit in? Where's this little snippet going to come up later? So you're not just like la-di-daing your way through and being like, oh, I missed that piece. You learn to be very conscious of what is being said and what Doyle is mentioning.
The guy had a telescope, didn't he? And so
the litigious guy, he did.
As soon as he was like, I was like, oh, so he's gonna see suspicious. Like, again, it makes you feel like Sherlock Holmes, which is a really cool effect to like be such a good writer, to know how to affect your reader to make them feel a certain way to match the genre.
Yeah,
it's excellent. But anyway, so Stapleton eventually takes him to his house, and then there's this point where Stapleton fucks off because he sees a butterfly, and he goes to get it, and then this beautiful woman comes out and is like, "You need to leave here at once. Go back to London, you son of a bitch. It ain't safe for you. Like, get out of here." And Watson's like, "But I just got here, bro. Like, why are you?" And then Stapleton comes back and was like, "Oh, you met my sister. This is Beryl. This is Dr. Watson." And she's like,
I made some very bad decisions.
I thought this was Henry Baskerville. And Watson's like, why would you say that? Want to say that to Henry Baskerville? She was like, "Don't worry about what I said. You're all good, buddy." And then he hangs out at Mary Pitt. And then when he goes to leave, Beryl runs,
barrels her way through the moors
around a secret path to get ahead of him and be like, "You know that thing I said earlier? Please don't worry about it. It wasn't for you. You're good. You can stay here as long as you want, bro. Don't worry." And he was like, "Why would you say that, though? Like, I'm friends with Henry Baskerville." And she was like, "Listen, don't ask me. Women's wiles."
Yeah, she's like, women were weird. That's what it is.
Good. It was a good excuse for the most part.
And she's like, "I gotta get back before my brother figures out I've gone too long." And you're immediately like, why is your brother so fucking controlling? Again, Stapleton, immediately, you're like, what the fuck's up with this guy? She fucks off. He goes back to the manor house. Eventually he is like, "Okay, I heard someone walking." And Watson's like, "I heard someone walking in the night, and I checked, and it was Barrymore. We should investigate, Henry." And Henry's like, "Absolutely. I love a good, let me do something with my life. I feel very out of place."
Isn't it also nice, too? I actively thought this. I was like, oh, he just goes straight to the client. That's so great. There's no extra melodrama by him trying to figure something out and then getting caught, and then maybe he's, mistaken for... It was just... Okay, bro, your servant dude is being really sketch. We need to figure this out. And then I love Henry. He's like, "Yes, man, let's go into it." And he doesn't doubt Watson, because Watson, his only job is to serve him there as somebody to help with this issue. So he's just like, "Oh yeah, that's really super strange," instead of calling into question and being like, "Oh, but Barrymore's been with my family for generations."
Yeah.
And so, that's really cool.
It's just very straightforward in a non-annoying way.
Yes. And also, like Katie said, Doyle ain't about drama. We ain't here to make some fucking melodrama. The Sherlock Holmes story are not here for your bullshit. And so they do a stakeout, and night one is a bust. Nothing happens, and they fall asleep in chairs. The next night, though, they hear Barrymore going through. And also, this story so many times tells you Barrymore's a very good-looking guy, and that his wife is just this, like, not that
slob, basically.
She's matronly and like chunky. Like that's and there's literally a point where Watson's like, I wonder if she was crying because Barrymore's hot now the mistress.
Yeah,
It's really funny.
And then he literally says he's like, and I would understand that because he's a very hot guy.
He's like very
basically
attractive man.
Yeah, so I was quite upset with the sequence of events that later happened, but continue.
He goes up, they follow Barrymore. Barrymore goes up to an old window that is specifically facing the moors, and he shines a candle in it. And Henry Baskerville is not like, let's figure this out or keep watching. He's like, Jacques! Like,
just immediately.
You fuck, what are you doing? And Barrymore's like, I can't say anything, please don't worry about it. And he's like, then I'm firing you, Barrymore. And Barrymore's like, it's not my secret to tell, buddy, please.
This is like the second time that the Britishness has stopped them from just solving the case.
He's
like,
exactly.
I can't. It's not my honor is on the line of I can't tell somebody else's secret.
And then a voice is like, it's okay, buddy, I'll tell it. And it's Barrymore's wife. And she's like, so, he was flashing a signal out on the moors because my brother is that convict who's like not a great guy, but I raised him, and so I really love him. So even though he's a terrible person, I can't let him starve. He's out there in the moors by himself. So I got my husband he lights signals, then my brother lights a signal back in the moors to let us know where to bring the food for him, and he's not hurting anyone, he won't do anything, and I'm a sister who loves her brother. What's a girl to do? And Sir Henry's like, oh, straight, okay, thanks for telling me, good night, guys. And then immediately to Watson is like, let's go fucking get this
dude.
We'll get it. We death or to the police we go. And Watson's like, absolutely. Let me get my what are those called? Revolver, pistol. Let me get my pistol. We got this.
And you know what's really cool too is I really like. So this is my third favorite scene in the novel, which is when they run out into the moors to go find him. They're hiding behind a really large boulder, and they've found the light source, which I really like. That also the idea that the light source was coming off from like a mile in the distance, but because the way the moors are geographically, you can see that far in the distance, which is really creepy, because then you can just see people in the distance, but you can't touch them. So it's that in a weird way is ghostly. But anyway, they find the light, and it's stuck between two boulders, so that way the wind doesn't take it, and also so nobody else sees the light besides the one direction. And the face of the convict comes up, and it's like really quite scary the way it's described in that moment. But I really love how when the convict starts running away, and they run after him, Watson doesn't shoot him in the back or anything, because he's like, well, this man, I'm not going to shoot a man who's running away from me.
Unarmed.
And I'm just like, that characterizes him so well, because it would be so easy just to hobble him and just shoot him in the leg but that could kill him. And I guess the doctor in him maybe, and also the soldier, like the noble soldier kind of thing.
The other thing that happens during this scene is they hear, and this happened earlier when Watson was with Stapleton, he heard like a weird baying coming across the moors, and he was like, yo, what the fuck is that sound? And Stapleton's like, I don't know, you'll never believe those hicks in the village are like, it's the Hound of the Baskervilles, but we're men of science, we don't believe such things. Yeah. It's probably a bird everybody thought was extinct. And Watson's like,
that's what he says.
Yeah, Watson's like, I guess that could be it. Birds sometimes make weird noises. Okay, and then it's the moors. It's dark. They're chasing this guy, and all of a sudden the baying happens. This loud, and it the way it's described is like this loud initial sound, and then it like a trembling back end cry, almost like a dog who's been chained somewhere that it doesn't want to be, and it's very upset about it. So like, but anyway, And Henry Baskerville is like, the fuck was that? That sounded like a hound. That was a baying of a hound. And Watson was like, Stapleton said it might be an extinct bird. And he was like, I know what the fuck a hound sounds like. Watson, what are
I
you,
know.
like, what
I
are
really
you
love-
peddling?
I love in this moment how Henry is just like, that was creepy as fuck. That has somewhat startled some superstition into me. I now feel a little on edge about the curse of my family.
Yep.
And I also like how like the mysticism of his family's like heritage location is starting to like seep into his American soul.
And then the other thing is he specifically says, Watson, what do the townspeople here call that? And Moss is like, I don't think it's important. Why do we don't have to mention it? And he's like, no, I can take it. Tell me, Watson. And Watson's like, they think it's the calling of the Hound of the Baskervilles, so, just nothing to worry about. And then the two of them are also like, what did Sherlock Holmes tell us not to do? Because specifically, Sherlock told Henry, do not go out onto the moors during the hours of darkness where evil is doing shit. Like, and they're like, oh, well, but then Henry's like, fuck it, we got this far, let's keep going. They end up chasing the guy, but he gets away, and there's this point where Watson turns around, and there's like a rock, like a giant cliffy rock face right in front of the moon. And
I think Pride
on
Rock from Lion King.
yeah, and on it is a silhouette of a man looking down at them. Like, and all they can see is it's a tall person slightly with his head down as if he's looking down at them. And Watson's like, what the fuck? Henry goes to look, the figure's gone. And Watson's like, perhaps it's the person who was tailing Henry in fucking London, and they followed us here. I feel the web growing tighter upon us. They go home, they go to sleep. Watson's like, I didn't like that. That was a weird guy. And the next morning, the Barrymores are like, we told you about my Barrymore's like, I told you about my brother-in-law, and then you immediately go to capture him? Not a friend move, bro. I don't appreciate it. And then basically the Barrymores are like, listen, he's going to go to South America. We've literally got a boat coming for him. He's not going to do anything. Otherwise, they're going to know he's here. The police have stopped looking in the moors. So, like, just fucking leave him alone. Also, it's around this time that Henry it's said in the narration that Henry, as a kind of peace thing, gives a bunch of his old clothes that he brought from America that he no longer wants to wear because he got a bunch of British style, because like the way they cut suits, certain things are just a little different, and he bought a brand new wardrobe, and so he gives his old wardrobe to Barrymore, like, sorry, bud, we won't try capture your brother-in-law. We good. And then Watson, after this happens, Barrymore's like, hey, I want to tell you something that because of British sensibilities, I didn't tell you earlier, even though it is kind of fucking integral to this investigation that you're doing. And what it is that after the day of Sir Charles's death, because he goes every night, he went and he walked, and one of the things we haven't mentioned, Sir Charles had a heart condition and he was very superstitious, and he was just like, he was an older dude. Every night he walked in this yew alley. He never went out on the moors. Like, Sir Charles never ever went out on the moors at night, but he would walk in this little alley that had a bunch of yew trees on either side every night, just getting his exercise. British people back then liked walking a lot. Like, that
was like their only hobby if you were rich.
Yeah. It like
that was like going to the movies.
Drawing. Yeah. And so he would walk every night, but then on this particular night, he stayed in one spot for a really long time because they could see that his cigar ashed multiple times. And they were like, oh, he must have been waiting for someone. I wonder who he was waiting for. Well, Barrymore now gives us that information. You fucking asshole, Barrymore. This would have been so useful earlier. He got a letter the morning of his death, and he got letters all the time, so Barrymore didn't pay attention. But then, a couple days after the death, Barrymore's wife finds a fragment of the letter in the grate because Sir Charles had thrown it in to burn it. And it basically says, please, 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 if you are a gentleman, please burn this letter after you read it. And I know that you are. Burn this letter after you read it, -LL. And they were like, oh. Watson's like, who's this LL person? It's obviously a lady. And Barrymore's like, I didn't want to tell anyone about this because, like, I didn't want to ruin Sir Charles's reputation. We really love that guy, and if he was having like a weird illicit affair with someone, like, I don't want that. And what good could it have done? He's dead. And Henry and he was like, he sells Sir Henry, and like, I didn't tell you at first, but now you've been really nice to us, so now I feel like I can number one trust you to tell you this, but then you deserve to know. And like, fuck you, Barrymore.
It's the Britishness is not super helpful.
Yes, it is not. The fear of the scandal literally inhibits the ability to solve a fucking murder.
There's one part where Watson is able to get information out of what's-her-face by just being like, I'm trying to keep this quiet. We don't want this to get loud. And she's like, okay, fine, I'll tell you some stuff that I really shouldn't be telling a stranger.
Not at all. Which is the scene we're just going to. Watson immediately is like, I need to find out who this LL is. He goes to the doctor, Mortimer, and was like, do you guys know an LL? And at first he's like, no. And then he goes, actually, there's Miss Laura Lyons, a very unfortunate woman who married an artist against her dad's wishes. And then the artist was an asshole and abandoned her. And now she's just stuck. And we got Sir Charles to give her some money so she could set up a typewriting business. And like, just what a sad story. Also, her dad is the terrible litigious guy, the HOA person.
Who just the HOA.
Yeah.
That's really what he is.
It's a perfect description of him. And she lives in Coombe Tracy, which is where the letter was from. And he was like, I'm gonna go see Miss Laura Lyons. And he goes down to see her, and she's like, who the fuck are you? And he's like, I know Sir Charles, and I have some questions for you. Why did you write a letter to Sir Charles on the day of his death? And she's like, I didn't write no such... And he's like, I've seen it. Please, 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 if you are a gentleman as I know you are, burn this letter after reading LL. And she's like, ugh, fuck, you know. And she basically says, I was going to ask him to help me get divorced. I want to get divorced from my husband, but I need the funds to do it. And I was going to ask him. And then he was like, okay, that's a very valid reason to try and meet up with someone who has helped with you in the past. Why wouldn't you meet in his house? And she was like, could you imagine going into a man's house after 8 o'clock at night by myself, unaccompanied? The scandal. So of course we had to meet outside. And like, who's going to see the fucking then? Barrymores? Like,
Girl. Yeah.
and then he's like, so what happened when you got there? And she's like, oh, I never went. And he's like, what the fuck you mean you didn't? You mailed this guy the morning of this to meet with him, and you just didn't show. And she was like, well, someone else was like, I'll help you and give you the money. And so she was like, so I didn't need to go. And then I didn't know anything until the next morning when I woke up and found out he was dead, right when he was waiting to meet me. And, you know, like, super weird. And then I didn't tell anyone because I thought they would think I was the murderer, or I had something to do with it, so I just kept my mouth shut.
And then he died.
And then he died. And Watson's like, I feel like you're not telling me everything. And she was like, and this is also the stage where he's like, I would hate for people to find out you sent a letter. Like, if we get the police involved, and they find out that you sent a letter to, like, Charles, they're gonna know. Like, it's gonna be a thing. They'll publish it in the newspapers, and that's why she talks a bit. But anyway, on his way back home to Baskerville Hall after this interview, he stops off at the litigious guy's house. Not because he wanted to, but he had to send the trap back. And he's like talking to him and he's trying to get out of it. But then the guy slips something, which is that he knows something connected to the man on the moors who is the convict. And Watson's like, has to pretend to not be interested, because if you show too much interest, this guy won't tell you. And has to, you know, play the guy. And the guy basically is, the guy basically is like, yeah, I've seen a kid taking supplies back and forth to the moors, so I know that convict is still there. And these people are going to be so mad that they are fighting with me, because then I didn't tell them what I knew. And then he's like, oh, look, there's the kid now. And Watson's like, oh, my God, yeah, because I'm looking for two men on the moors. There's the convict. Well, I know about the convict, but then there's that guy that was spying on me from the top of that hill the other night who is confirmed to also be living on the moors. And they watch this little kid go up into this one specific place and leave. And he was like, see, those bastards. The police should have been more helpful to me. Look what I'm denying them, which is just like, that's a crime, bro. That's a crime. But Watson immediately is like, let's get my revolver. Let's go see what the fuck is up with this guy. Because I know where what's his face is hiding out. This isn't the convict. This is that guy. This is that motherfucker who was spying on me. And he goes in and he finds like things, and he finds a slip of paper written by the kids saying John Watson went to Coombe Tracy, and he goes, oh my god, they're not here for Baskerville. They're here for me. What could this possibly be? And then he hears footsteps come up, and then the voice says, "Ah, Watson, fancy seeing you here," or something equally as just chill. And he's like, "Oh my god, Holmes!" And you're like, "Who the fuck else, buddy?" Who? And Holmes is like, "Yeah, I've been here the whole time. I needed everyone to think I was in London because the whoever is doing shit knows that I was onto their trail, so I needed them to think that they could act freely without my eyes. I've been here the whole time." And Watson's like, "And you lied to me? You used me?" And let me tell you, Holmes does this all the time to poor Watson. There's this one time where he lets Watson think he is legitimately dying. Like, legitimately death's door, incurable disease, dying, to sell to the guy he's fighting against that the guy's plan worked. And because, unfortunately, Watson is not a good liar. He's not good at dissembling. And so if Holmes needs Watson to act like something is true, he just lets him believe it's true.
Yeah, that is one thing that carries over into the show a lot. Actually, speaking of, what just hit me? Because it's been on my recommended on YouTube a lot, and for some reason I keep clicking on it. I wonder if one of the reasons why the iterations of Sherlock Holmes in, more modern or contemporary, like, TV and movie stuff, maybe not so much the movie with RDJ, but definitely the show with Benedict Cumberbatch. I wonder if it was like inspired by House MD,
Well, House was inspired by Sherlock Holmes,
Yeah,
very
exactly.
explicitly. So yeah, it does. That
I
makes
think
sense.
I wonder if it fed into itself, and because it was so he was so well received because he was an irritating but very intelligent character and everything. I wonder if that actually bled back into the envisioning of Sherlock Holmes.
Of Holmes. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I think that
completely.
is a really good reading of it, because he did become, in a lot of ways, a lot of people love House and don't realize it is a retelling of Sherlock Holmes. Even that one other doctor guy has a name that's really close to John Watson.
It's Wilson instead of Watson.
Wilson, yes.
Yeah. And like how that all like play, and I think the one lady's name is Irene or some, I don't know. I don't think her name was Irene.
I can't remember.
Yeah. But anyway,
Cuddy is the one girl's name, but that's not the right.
Yeah. I think that's a different one.
But anyway, so where was I? Oh yeah, sure. Holmes
Using
pops
Watson,
up,
yeah.
and Watson's like, "Well, fuck you, buddy," and it's like, I'm sorry, but I needed everyone to believe it, and so I needed you to really believe it. And this is like one of those moments where Sherlock is a dick, and for a specific reason, realizes it's upsetting, but like does it anyway. And someone in the Discord had mentioned that it was like that person with their that has a neurodivergent partner who can sometimes be like rude unintentionally, but you're like, it's my neurodivergent partner that I love. Which I thought, is very funny considering how many people ship Watson and Sherlock together. But anyway, they get over this pretty quickly, and Sherlock is like, yeah, so basically everything you discovered, I also discovered. Great work, bestie.
Thanks for your help. You gave me some good info, even though some of it was irrelevant.
Yes. But specifically that he gave Sherlock a piece of information that Stapleton accidentally let slip. And basically, Sherlock is like, oh yeah, it's Stapleton, his wife. And Watson's like, what do you mean his fucking wife? And he was like, oh yeah, his sister, that's his wife. Based on the little tiny actually useful tidbit you gave me, I found out that they had the name of Vandeleur running a school in northern Britain, and that's his fucking wife. And also, I think he was lying to Miss Laura Lyons, and he was the one who was like, get a divorce so I can marry you, and that had benefited him by everybody thinking these were two single people who weren't together. And Watson's like, plot she thickens. What are we gonna do? And Sherlock is like, tomorrow we're gonna go visit Miss Laura Lyons. As they're like coming down the mountain, they hear a man screaming and the baying of a hound. And Sherlock is like, oh no. Because at this point, Watson was like, well, let's just go get our guy. And he's like, we can't. We have no actual, like, I know Stapleton is the one fucking around, but I have no actual evidence for a case, and we need evidence. And then he hears this, like, a man screaming and the baying of a hound. And he's like, oh, fuck, you left your charge unattended. I wanted more evidence and didn't keep this from happening. Fucking, they run, and they see the clothing. They see a man laying dead, wearing the clothing of Henry Baskerville, and they're both like, God damn it. Well, Sherlock is like, curse me and my need for a complete case.
It's really funny.
Yeah, I put my client at risk because of it. And then all of a sudden he's like, he has a beard! And he starts dancing. And Watson's like, what the fuck? Why are you... And then they realize it's not Sir Henry. It is the convict who Barrymore gave Baskerville's spare old clothes to, and he's dead. And they're like, because he was wearing the clothing, the hound got the wrong scent, and this guy. But Sherlock is like, I wonder why like a hardened criminal saw like a hound, because at this point they know there is something, like there's a hound, like it's a physical hound. And he's like, but I wonder why he screamed like that. Like, why would a hound cause you to like this guy was a hardened fucking criminal, like, just, and you can almost hear Sherlock be like, why don't you just kick the dog? Like, what is up here? And
which,
they
by
go
the
back.
way, is bullshit. Dogs are so insanely dangerous.
Yes,
especially like bulldog, like pit bulls. Like they're not huge dogs, but they will fuck you up.
They're very strong. And especially the like type of hounds that they're talking about in Britain, like they could be large and like made to like bite shit.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so and the other thing was, how did they see him? Because it was in the moors in the dark. Like, how did he see the hound from a distance? Because he ran and then ended up falling, and that's what killed him. The hound never got to him. And so that's another question Sherlock has. That makes a bit more sense. So they end up going back to the hall. Henry Baskerville is so happy to see him. Poor Mrs. Barrymore is like, oh no, my brother's dead. Woe is to me. But Henry's like, man, Sherlock's here. It's a party. Also, when they find the body, Stapleton comes out. Like, but this is before they go back to the hall. When they're still looking at the body, Stapleton comes by, and I was like, oh, hi, gentlemen. I was just out on the moors having a walk. Oh, no, is that dead Henry Baskerville? Oh, my friend, how could this happen? He was so young. And then he was like, who the fuck's this guy? Stapleton, and they were like, fuck this guy. What an asshole. He thought he did it. And then Holmes is like, he had to be close by to call off the hound. You know, like, that's why he has to be. And that's how he got here so quick. But they go back. Henry is so happy to see Sherlock. He's like, woohoo. And basically Sherlock is like, listen, buddy, you're going to need to implicitly trust me and not question the shit I tell you to do in the next day. Like, I just need you to hang. And at one point they're like in the hall, and Sherlock looks up at the paintings, and he's like, wow, what amazing paintings. And Henry's like, oh yes. And he's like, can you tell me, you see that guy right over there, Henry, can you tell me who the fuck in your family that is? And he was like, actually, that's Hugo Baskerville. That's the guy that started the whole problem with the fucking hound to begin with. He stole a woman and wanted to force her into marriage. Yeah, that's that guy. And Sherlock's like, wow, what a great painting. And then, like, Henry goes away, and Sherlock's like, yo, I need you to look at this painting, Watson. And Watson's like, I'm staring at it. And then Sherlock climbs up and covers the hat and this other thing so that just the face is showing. And Watson's like, holy shit, that's Stapleton's face. That's fucking Stapleton. And Sherlock is like, fucking motive. He's part of the family. The pieces,
Inheritance.
where the pieces are coming together, baby. And then the next morning, Henry Baskerville is like, what do you want to do? I'm supposed to go to Mary Pitt House tonight for dinner. You want to, which is where Stapleton's house is. Also, we haven't mentioned it, but Henry Baskerville is in love with Beryl Stapleton, Stapleton's sister, who is his wife. And
you slipped the tongue there.
Yeah. And previously Stapleton freaked the fuck out when Henry asked Beryl to marry him, and, you know, because it's it's his wife.
Yeah. And they were like,
Yikes.
that's weird. Why was he like that? Is there maybe an abusive situation going on?
Like, what's the problem here? And you're like, tis incest at first? Like, what
Yes.
is he in
That
love
is
with?
literally what I was thinking.
Is he in love with his sister in a problematic way? Like, what is happening here? But anyway, Henry has been invited to dinner tonight at Merripit House, and he's like, yo, Watson, Sherlock, come with me. And Sherlock's like, nope, we're going back to London. And Henry's like, you're
Rude.
leaving me? In the middle of shit being, like, the plot, she is thickening. I am in danger, bro. And Sherlock's like, you just have to trust me.
Yeah.
You just need to suck it
What
up
did
and
I
trust me.
just tell you?
Yeah. Also, I need you to go in your trap, send it back to the house, and I need you to walk back at the end of dinner. And he was like, you told me in no uncertain terms to never walk the moors alone at night when evil could be prowling around and doing shit. And Sherlock is like, yeah, now you need to do it. You'll be absolutely fine. Don't worry about it, bro. And he's like, okay. So then the guy's like, when are you leaving? And he's like, right after breakfast. They fuck off to the train station. They get to the station. Sherlock is like, I need you to contact the people, send a message from London back to Sir Henry saying, hey, I left a little wallet. Can you mail it back to me from London? So the telegram comes from London to make it look like he's there. And Watson's like, oh, you need to really sell that we're in London so that Stapleton feels at ease to like pull off his coup, like his little murder situation. And then they go to Coombe Tracy to visit Laura Lyons again, and Sherlock is like, don't lie, Stapleton has a wife. And she's like, bitch, what are you talking about? Stapleton has a wife.
I loved this part so much.
And she was like, you better have fucking evidence if you want me to believe you. And Sherlock's like, I came prepared. And shows her pictures, descriptions of them. And he was like, the name is Vandeleur. And now they're like, here we are. And she's like, oh, fuck. So he was never going to marry me. He was using me the whole time. I'll tell you everything. And basically she says, Stapleton convinced me to write that letter. He literally told me what to write verbatim. And then after I sent it, was like, never mind, I can't let another man help you get a divorce. Since I'm the one that wants to marry you, I'll have to get the funds together. So don't go. I can't let my honor take such a blow, which this is how British it is, that she was like, yeah, no, that's valid. That makes sense.
So funny. It only makes sense in a British context.
Yeah. And then she was like, and then I found out he was dead afterwards, but I trusted Stapleton so much, but apparently he's a fucking asshole. So, now you know everything. And Sherlock's like, perfect. It's all coming together, baby. And now we just have to, I've called Lestrade up from London. Lestrade he's the best of the detectives in London. So we're going to call him up. And it's so funny because in the first, like in the earlier stories, the detectives have such a problem with Sherlock. And by this point in their like history together, they're bros. What's the game, Sherlock? I'm here for you, buddy. Sorry, my chair's so squeaky, guys. So Lestrade comes up and they're like, okay, we're gonna camp out outside of Merripit House once Sir Henry goes to get dinner, and we're gonna wait. We're gonna see what happens. And Watson has to go like creep up to the house. He sees Stapleton exit the house. Also, Stapleton's wife is nowhere to be seen, and they're like, I wonder where that bitch is at. All the lights are off in the rest of the house. And Watson sees Stapleton come out, go to an outhouse, open it. He hears scuffling inside, and you're like, oh, bitch, that's where the Hound is. And then they're waiting, but the problem is, despite it being a very clear night, there's a fog rolling in off the moors, and it's a thick fog it's going to make it so you can't see your hand in front of your face after a while. And Sherlock is like, I need Henry to leave the fuck now, because if this fog gets too heavy, it is greatly going to inhibit our ability to see shit. So they end up pulling back a bit more and getting a higher ground point. And then he hears Sir Henry walking down. They watch him pass and let him go past so that they can get the Hound on as he comes towards it. But as the Hound breaks through the fog, they all freak out. Lestrade drops his gun. Sherlock freezes. Watson freezes because a giant ass fucking Hound, bigger than a normal Hound, but with like phosphorus blue flames around its eyes and mouth, and all of its saliva stuff. And they're like, oh my god, is it a hellhound? And like the Hound runs past them towards poor Sir Henry, and Sherlock is like, fuck! And they have to turn, and they start throwing shots off. There's one that hits the Hound, but it's such a tank, it just keeps going. So they have to, like, run up. Sherlock has to, like, unload 5 rounds into the Hound's flank as it's on top of poor fucking Sir Henry, who's freaking out. But luckily he was fine. It didn't actually, like, maul him or anything. They killed it before anything bad happened, but now Sir Henry's got, like, real nerves. And they realized there was phosphorus that had been put on in its eyes and in its mouth to make it glow and look really devilly, and taking inspiration from the myth of the Hounds of the Baskervilles. And this is also still in the stage before Watson gets chubby. There's a stage in the canon where Watson gets portly, and he's less spry and light on his feet. And I fucking love it. It is so cute. Because, Watson's he's a great shot. Like, Watson's just fantastic. But anyway, and then they're like, okay, Stapleton has obviously run off. We'll go look at his house. They get Sir Henry back to his house, and there's a line saying, he has to travel the world with Dr. Mortimer before he can come back and be, like, okay enough to continue being Sir Henry Baskerville.
So
Baskerville
cool,
Hall. Yeah, it was so traumatizing.
I mean, it kind of was, yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely is. We know it is because Sherlock's first impression was to go, duh, when seeing the Hound. But they go back to Merripit House, and they're kind of looking through for some clues, and they find Stapleton's wife upstairs, tied to a beam in the center of his museum room, bruised. She has a, like, whiplash on her neck, and she's tied up so you can barely see her face, and you can't tell if it's a man or a woman. And she basically is like, listen, he's probably gone to his safe house that he created on the moors where he kept the Hound. Like, go get him. Fuck that asshole. I hate him. And, like, you've never seen someone just immediately like, I hope he dies a terrible death. May he burn in hell forever. And also just like, I was an idiot and I thought he loved me, and he didn't. Fucking hell.
He clearly doesn't.
And so the next day they go to find him because they can't, it's too foggy now that they can't even, Beryl knows the same tracks that Stapleton used to get through the moors. And she's like, it's too, the fog is too heavy. And Holmes is like, if it's too heavy for you to go through, it's probably too heavy for Stapleton to have gone through. So we'll see what happens. And so they go out the next day. And at one point, as they're going through the moors, as Beryl's leading them through and they can see the markers, they find Sir Henry's boot, the old boot that had gone missing, that Stapleton had used to have the Hound sent to to go after him specifically. And as they go through more, they find no sign of him and no sign that he actually got back to his safe house on the moor. Also, they fed poor Dr. Mortimer's curly-haired spaniel
dog. Oh yeah,
to the Hound, and
that was actually
sucks.
Really depressing.
Yeah. Well, this whole part was, for me, the creepiest. The fact that, like, there's this one part where it was like Stapleton is just somewhere in the bottom of the bogs of these moors.
Yeah.
And there's this like a lack of a specific type of climax where you get the bad guy, because you don't see Stapleton's death, you don't see the moment, you just know he is gone, dead, and just in the mire of this bog. And it is this really
which is very sad in and of itself. In a way, it's just depressing because he was a family member who was more concerned with wealth rather than connection, whereas the almost like the foil to that, right, is Henry. And Henry was just all about, like, enlivening the place, fully recognizing it for what it was. And so there's this, like, difference between greed and just pride. And it's really just depressing. It's sad.
And we also lose the that, like, satisfying moment of seeing the bad guy get his
that too.
Like, it just subverts that, but it also makes it just really creepy because you're just like, oh, that's a terrible death. This thing that you thought you had overcome, you had championed, you had conquered, just sucking you down into its depth, and it's this lonely place. It just, ooh.
And it also
works
is
really
like he wasn't a great guy, but he didn't deserve this. So you don't
No.
feel like the satisfaction of him getting his comeuppance.
Yeah, it's such a smart choice because it really destabilizes you because so far it has been a fairly straightforward like
Mystery.
murder mystery thing, and this is a bit of a destabilizing ending compared to a normal one. And they end up explaining that he was Sir Charles's brother was a bit of a asshole and fled to South America and apparently died unmarried and childless. Except no, he did get married and he did have a child. Surprise! It's Stapleton. And Stapleton, after fucking some shit up in South America, came back to England under the name Vandeleur, opened a school he was not qualified to open, and when the guy who was the only qualified portion of running it died, it ended terribly, so that they had to change the name again and flee. And this whole time he's dragging poor Beryl, who married him, and he is an asshole, and she, like, if she shows any, like, independence or like he's abusive and she's under his trap. And then eventually when he was like, I'm gonna kill Charles Baskerville, you gotta help me shoot, like, I need you to woo him. Like he wanted his wife to woo old Sir Charles,
which is gross. It's because she's an object then instead of a person, so it's shitty.
Let's not kink shame. Maybe he was a cuck.
Yes, maybe he was a cuck. But anyway, and she says, no, I'm not going to help you kill this man. And so while she doesn't, like, and she doesn't actually know what his plan is, like, she knows he gets a hound, but she has no idea how it's connecting to all of this other stuff until after he's dead and is like, he died with not a scratch on him, but he has a lot of superstition about a hound. And so Beryl just, like, she out there trying her best. And yeah, and then he created this plan, and originally it was just to kill Stapleton. He never kill Charles Baskerville. He never had a plan to use it again. And originally, Sherlock surmises that he probably was gonna just try kill Baskerville Henry in London, but then once he realized Sherlock Holmes was on the case and he thought Sherlock didn't go back to Dartmoor, that he could just do it there. And, you know, what a better way than just with a hound in a closet on an island in the moors. And it ends, and there's also this interesting thing he does where Watson is still super focused on, like, the tragedy and weirdness of this case, but Sherlock has immediately moved on. He goes back to London, and he immediately works 2 other cases, and it's when he finally finishes that second case and another one hasn't immediately presented himself that he goes up to Sherlock and he's like, hey, I need you to fill in some of the details I don't have that I know you have. And Sherlock is like, you just needed to go to my encyclopedia under B. I've written everything. And Sherlock is so focused on his cases that once he finishes one, he's moved on, but you can tell that Watson is still affected by this in a way that he needs the answers. And it is still not satisfying because the guy just slipped into a bog, and there's certain questions that are just Sherlock's probably very accurate assumptions about it, but you're not 100% sure because Stapleton is dead at the bottom of a bog.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's literally the same thing as when parents can never, like, if parents never receive or a family member never receives the corpse of a missing child or a missing family member. And it's like there's no end. There's no epilogue.
There's no finality to it.
Yeah, yes. Exactly. So it always feels like an open case in a way.
And it's just a really interesting way to end this.
It's haunting. It's a haunting way to end a haunting tale. And
also, poor Henry and Beryl don't get together in the end.
Yeah, that really does suck.
Yeah. And the narration's like,
betrayed.
That's the thing he probably hated the most.
Yes. You know.
And the other thing about it is that, like, the whole Sherlock Holmes moving on to another thing, that's where he's kind of like a little bit weird, but not to the same like extent that he is in the rest of the fiction, where he's like obsessed with these cases and this is the only way he can like function. It's like, no, he's just a very focused guy and he is kind of on to the next thing. It's a much more realistic level of that than it then later becomes in the Holmes.
I would agree.
So,
They use the example of a litigator who, during the case, can tell you everything they need, but once you move on to a new case as a lawyer, the details of the old one have fallen out of your brain. And it's kind of like when you're in school and you have to study for a test and you're like, you know it in and out, and then you finish the class and you don't know shit.
yeah.
And it
Yeah, it's
connects it to
exactly
that.
like that.
And that there is like this, yeah, it's such an interesting way to end this particular story. And especially compared to some of the other ones where you do get like a bit more satisfaction out of the ending. And I will say to Doyle that he is very good about keeping the stories and the endings fresh and keeping you on your toes. And I find this one just a perfect example of the eccentricities of Sherlock, his relationship with Watson, Doyle's storytelling as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
That economy of detail, you know, like mentioning that Barrymore gets the clothing sets you up to know that, like, unless you weren't paying attention, that the dead man is not Sir Henry. At that one point, that her learning about the telescope and the litigious guy is gonna, like, you know, there's a bunch of ways that he ties everything together, and this ending is just like where Doyle is like, you can't always have a satisfying ending, but also in my ending, I'm going to give you the creepiest feeling, like the most,
yeah,
like bereft. Like there's such a weird thing in reading the ending of this story that is creepier and weirder and more off-putting than everything else that has happened beforehand.
It's because it's depressing. It's the you know, as I have coined in our recent videos, the the Hills Have Eyes effect. There's a certain macabre to the unfinished and the haunting and the never, like the passing, but then the uneventful passing and the continuous like failure of like the human spirit. And so that doesn't quite happen obviously here because it's Sherlock Holmes, but it's like similar in feel in the effect that Stapleton you know, just dies horrifically but off screen. So it's not even momentous. It's like a silent fart.
It is peeling back the edifice of fiction and giving you a realistic moment that feels uncanny within the context of the rest of the story. The rest of the story feels so firmly rooted in fiction that getting this ending that feels like you would hear a crime, and in a lot of like true crime podcasts, the endings are very unsatisfying and not like they don't have that like cha moment. I was complaining to Will about that in a lot of the nonfiction I read don't have that moment where you're like, yeah, it all came together perfectly.
It all came together,
the satisfyingness and this ending. And I didn't realize it until I just read all of this nonfiction where I have that dissatisfaction in the ending. That's what Doyle is doing in this moment. It is suddenly a peak of a realistic ending to a way a story can, a mystery, a crime, a human tale can end within the realm of a very specifically packaged murder mystery story set in a gothic mansion.
Yeah, it's true. It's different than you would expect the other beats of the story to go. Yeah, it was really interesting having finally read one because this was again my first one I've read. And like it was again, I think my biggest appreciation was that like, you know, up earlier in the chat, Otter had said that like there's a sense of healthy male camaraderie in this story, and it's really true. And that was kind of one of the things that really I found interesting was that, you know, Holmes just isn't who we think him as a character. He's a lot more wholesome and like kind of quirky and smart, and it's like that's all that really Doyle needed to do because he was such a talented
narrator,
mystery writer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I enjoyed it. Honestly, I've enjoyed it more talking about it now with you two.
Yeah. So in essence, don't sleep on it.
We probably will do more, I think, at some point because this will do terrible in the algorithm. But It's good to broaden our literary experience.
Maybe pretend that we're going to be talking about BBC
Comparing
Sherlock.
it to the BBC Sherlock one? Yeah.
We're not. I mean, we do. You can include some of my rants
10
about the
episodes
BBC.
Sherlock's messed up from the original and their true meaning.
You should watch the BBC Sherlock. I just want you to watch one episode.
It's so annoying these days.
The BBC Hounds of Baskerville episode. It is so shit.
It is really shit.
In comparison to how good this story is.
It is, I remember.
That Moffat thought he ate.
With the
and that it was a subversion.
You mean that he cooked? Yeah, no, he did not.
He thought I hate it. I hate it so much. It is such a shitty episode that it typifies a lot of the issues. So you should watch it, Will, and let me know.
I will think about it. I don't know. I can't stand just the smarminess of that entire series. Just not even having watched it, but just
that's
knowing
a good word.
about it. Yeah, it's just like, oh, aren't we perfect? Oh,
yeah, well, no, there was like but you know, like in those years in college, which is when I was in college, when we were all in college, those were the years where that was like hot, and that was like cool.
People loved it.
People were obsessed with it, man. Oof.
The first 2 seasons didn't let you know how they were gonna fail you, so you believed that they were, because like they kept being like, if you pay attention to every detail, you can put it together. We're specifically playing.
No, and then
things.
it just got weird. And
also, they just didn't. They laughed at you. They literally set up a mystery. They said, if you paid attention, you'd figure out how Sherlock did it. And then in the first episode of season 3, they were like, "Fuck you."
Yeah, I remember
anyone
that.
who was invested, who wanted to know how it happened or what the theory was, and who spent the past 2 years reading fan fiction about how Sherlock got away with it, what has happened, any of that, fuck you. Fuck you.
It is. That would be good for the algorithm. We should think about doing that. Think about what the worst episodes are, and then we'll compare them to the actual story.
How did Sherlock do it? Well, he actually did it, then something like to that, or whatever. The unexplained explained. How did Sherlock be Sherlock?
How did Sherlock get to suck so much? I've watched H Bomber Guy's video on it, but still, I don't quite know.
I would love to do a video essay tracing all the different adaptations and what brought us to this current iteration, because I truly wonder if the
house thing.
Yeah, I think the house thing is a great starting point, because if you look at The Great Mouse Detective, that is a much more chill Sherlock and Watson that I find much more now that I've read this, I'm like, oh yeah, that's like the most accurate Sherlock. And also, despite it not being a well-acclaimed show, the Elementary Sherlock is for me a better adaptation of the canon. And just doing watching all the different adaptations and then making a video essay about it.
Okay, thank you all for joining us, our parasocial darlings.
Have a great holidays. Bye.
Bye.